Florida gets a new defensive coordinator this week. After Patrick Toney left last week, Florida officially announces Austin Armstrong as defensive coordinator. He will be the youngest defensive coordinator in Power 5 football, in all of Division I football next year, at just 29 years old. Armstrong was a hot name. I was told after last season, Kirby Smart was talking to him and said, hey, if Will Muschamp leaves, we're going to bring you in as sort of a defensive coordinator in waiting. That sounds great for a 29-year-old to get a job offer like that, or a potential job offer like that from a two-time defending national champion. He also had interest from Oregon, and then Nick Saban hired him. So you get the Saban stamp of approval from Armstrong, and you get to Alabama, and you last there about 8 days before Billy Napier calls up and says, hey, how about instead of inside linebackers, you come be our defensive coordinator. He's only been on the road or only been in Gainesville for a little bit, but right now recruiting will be picking up. Has he reached out to any recruits yet, Corey?
Yeah, he has. He's reached out to all the defensive commits. He's reached out to some of the newly offered targets too. I mean, Florida's been offering a lot of kids in recent weeks. Several offers been handed out. So he wasted a little time, kind of initiating those conversations, trying to build those relationships. I mean, 2024 class is still very early. We still have about 9 months until the early sign period. So that's plenty of time. I think with these coaching changes, the hard part was the timing as far as the spring practice. That's the tough part, on field stuff. But when it comes to recruiting, there's plenty of time to kind of build those relationships. So I think overall, the response has been good. I've talked to a few kids that said they love his energy, his passion for the game. Just, how eager he was to get those kids on the phone. They felt like priorities, as far as like how fast he got on the phone with them. So all's trending up, on the recruiting trail. It's going to take time to really manufacture, those tight-knit type of relationships. But, early on, the response has been good.
And it will be a little awkward, I think, as Florida opens spring practice on Saturday at 11 a.m. The Gators will hit the field with 2 less coaches than they're allowed to have. I've been on the phones all week. I would like Billy Napier to make a decision so I can stop making phone calls about this. On Wednesday, Napier had 7 wide receiver coach candidates in the office for interviews. I was told none of those were hired at the time, and 3 more potential candidates will be in this weekend. Get a chance to watch practice as well as get interviewed. You'd like to have a full 10 on-field coaches, but I think there's a little, wink, wink. Florida has a lot of GAs and analysts, and they won't be coaching during the 15 minutes that we're out there. But I'd imagine they have enough people on the field during practice to make a practice go, Corey.
I think especially at wide receiver. I mean, I think at wide receiver, you saw when Kerry Colbert took the Denver job, he kind of gave assistant wide receivers coach David Doker that stamp of approval.
Yeah.
I know he won another award. I think it was 30 under 30. It was some type of award that he got a lot of recognition for. And I thought the timing of that was pretty interesting. It was that morning when, word got out that On3 reported that Kerry Colbert was headed to NFL, and just around that time, within that same hour, David Doker was getting a stamp of approval, all over the internet. It was kind of like, hey, if we do go with this guy's legit. Here's the awards and all that type of thing. And I've heard that from recruits too. He's active on the recruiting trail. A lot of the wide receivers that have been offered in this class speak with Coach Doker. So I think on the field for spring practice, I don't think there's really a rush at wide receiver. I think they're comfortable with Doker calling the shots, at least for now. Or if they do promote him, I think it's one of the guys you and I have kind of done our research on, one of the guys that's under consideration. So I think that's definitely one of the positions where maybe Florida doesn't feel as rushed. I mean, you have Armstrong in replacing Toney. I think tight end is going to be the most interesting one as far as a coaching search. A lot of candidates that I think maybe some people aren't too familiar with, unless you're a overall college football fan. So
sure,
that's going to be the one that's going to be very interesting. And I think with tight end, Florida needs to really kind of hit on all cylinders when it comes to this 2024 cycle. I mean, they signed a tight end last cycle, but it was Tony Livingston really signed 2 cycles ago, but he carried over. And he's kind of a raw playmaker. I remember when they initially recruited him under the Dan Mullen staff. They liked him at offensive tackle. And that was at the very beginning. But as time went on, he plays basketball. He kept leaning out, and they didn't think he could keep on the necessary weight. So tight end this cycle, before Peebler took the Arizona Cardinals job, there's a lot of tight ends in this cycle that Florida has been in the running for. And Florida's been near the top of the list for a lot of them. So I think that's going to be the position where, Florida might need to make up some ground with whoever they hire at that position. Walter Matthews, he's a 6'7" target out of Georgia. I asked him right when Peebler took the job, does this affect your recruitment? He's like, no, but, he recruited me harder than any other school. Like, that relationship was really strong. And some other kids said, hey, it does affect my recruitment. So I think, wide receiver is kind of the more flashy position, between that and tight end. But I think Florida probably feels more comfortable deep down, obviously, because you have Doker. But that's tight end's going to be the one position I'm definitely monitoring the most as far as finding that new coach.
And I think that tight end position is, as a tight end coach, I like Tim Brewster, but I don't think Tim Brewster is a revolutionary X's and O's coach. He did a good job coaching the guys that he had, and he was an assassin on the recruiting trail. I think, especially in this Florida offense where you're going to have a lot of 12 personnel, 2 tight end sets, you've got tight end, at least in 2020, was just an extension of the offensive line. Like, there's not much to coach there. I think Florida needs to get someone who is a great recruiter at that position.
I think Larry Scott too doesn't get enough credit for what he did with Kyle Pitts, and I get Bruce. I mean, that's why when when Pitts won the award, they had Scott and Brewster, in the same picture, because it wasn't all Brewster, and even Brewster.
Hey, Brew will tell you he'll take the credit for Kyle Pitts.
And
Brew put Pitts on his resume.
Yeah, and I kind of went on Twitter when all that went down, saying that, hey, Larry Scott deserves a lot of credit for the development of Kyle Pitts. And it's just funny how that all worked out, because I know when they had Felipe Franks, he didn't really target Pitts that often. It was really the Kentucky game when Franks unfortunately went down and Trask came in, and all of a sudden Pitts became a top target. Like, they had some type of chemistry from practice. It's almost like Pitts and Trask benefited each other as far as how far they went in the draft over their career at Florida. But that's the thing too. I know Brewster's, obviously he's at Colorado. Someone told me recently that he kind of was one of those coaches that inquired about the Florida job, like now that it's back open again. And but he's happy at Colorado. They're doing big things under Deion Sanders early on, at least on the recruiting trail. But it's fun. Brewster has that reputation for being a good recruiter, but when you look at his time at Florida, there was a lot of guys he didn't close on, And so it's kind of, you can bring him in as a big name guy, but I just don't know how that would really sit with the fan base. If you brought Brewster back for a second stint, what do you think the response would be if they brought him back?
I think there's a lot of the fan base that thinks Brewster's washed, that his best days are behind him. I think. And maybe they're right. I don't know, because, if you look at his list when he was at FSU specifically, his list of the recruits that he landed, he got Dalvin Cook to troll Florida for months and then go to Florida State. And Dalvin Cook might be Dalvin Cook's on probably the Mount Rushmore of Florida State football players in the history of their football program. So he's shown that he can recruit, but are you still connecting with kids at this level? How much does NIL change recruiting and what they can do? So to me, I wouldn't think. I just don't think there's many sexy names at tight end. So it's a familiar name, and fans might like that, but also because it's familiar and it wasn't great. I don't give him much or any really credit for Kyle Pitts. Kyle Pitts came in, I remember, and then as a tight end in the first spring practice I go out to, he's playing wide receiver, and I'm like, what? This is a waste. Like, he's not a wide receiver. And I think that only benefited him, in his route running and footwork once he moved back to tight end. But I think Brewster would be a good hire. I don't know that Florida's talking to him at all about it. I think that might be one-sided in terms of interest there. But yeah, I think Florida's going to go into open practice Saturday with 2 less coaches than they should have.
Well, even going back to what you're saying too, though, with recruiting, it's like you can get these big hires there, well, coaches that have a good resume when it comes to recruiting. Yeah, I just don't think. I mean, you're always going to need good recruiters, but the whole NIL factor, I feel like, has just changed everything. I feel like from recruiting from A to Z, I mean, you need those relationships to kind of jumpstart, that relationship between the school and the kid. But when it comes down to signing, and say if you have 4 schools that are somewhat hovering in the same spot, it really comes down to, okay, not every kid, but a lot of these big name kids, the NIL factor. So it's like I feel like you need the good coaches that are, the good recruiters to kind of jumpstart everything. But it's like kind of with Corey Raymond. I mean, really, a lot of people were like if it wasn't for NIL, when all that, part of me thinks Corey Raymond, he gets Cormani McLean, in previous classes. Like, I feel like there's a lot of, I mean, that was just a whole roller coaster when it comes to that whole thing. I know Miami, I mean, and kudos to Miami too, man. I mean, a lot of people, I mean, we got everyone in the media kind of got destroyed because no one had him going to Miami. Every single analyst, every prediction had him going to Florida, but that's what you do. And you kind of, I mean, that was the vibe all across the country. But then when NIL kind of enters the picture and stuff gets rearranged at the last second, it's hard to really put those predictions on those 5-star kids now because it could change within, the last hour or two, so it's interesting, man. So they need to get a good recruiter at these positions, but NIL, I feel like that's just the game changer when you're at a school like Florida.